You're live. Thank goodness. Otherwise, Eva would be very annoyed. Oh, so here we are. Jim's back again to do some more plaster stuff here. And I had kind of an eventful week, both with a few little health issues and some other interesting things that we'll get into as soon as a few people start showing up here. We got a whole 2 watching at the moment. 4.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for coming back.
yeah, 5. Yeah, they're piling on now. So yeah, it was an interesting week. As you people who are here, hey Earl, noticed last week I was feeling a little peakedy at the end of the day, and I still wasn't feeling that good by Monday night. So Eva and Chris convinced me to head on over to the hospital, and Jim gave me a ride over there. Jim and his wife. Hello, Aries and William.
Hi, Aries. Hi, William.
And so they did some tests and some this and some that, and they also were looking really carefully at my heart and everything, I guess, because I had the heart surgery there, but they didn't find anything there. Basically, my gallbladder was in less than stellar condition, and so they decided to remove it. And I think it's about Tuesday morning at 10, they had the gallbladder out, and about, what was it, 5:30 you came to pick me up there?
Yeah, you were
about 5:30 in the afternoon.
I'm 24-hour in and out.
Out of the thing. And normally they said it's an outpatient procedure now.
Oh,
wow. It's amazing. Hey, Terry. And so anyhow, got that done. Now the problem was we had that lecture to go to on Thursday. And so it's like, oh, wow, because that lecture, he only does it like every 4 or 5 years. For all we know, that's the last one of those lectures he ever does.
It very well might be.
Yeah, I'm doing okay, Aries. And so Jim wanted to see if we were planning on going over there anyhow together, but Jim not only drove, but he also handled the samples, because while we were there, we were dropping off samples from Montana B for the camp, the Center for Advanced Material Processing.
Yeah. Metallurgical processing.
Something like that.
Metallurgical processing.
Advanced metallurgical processing?
Yeah.
Okay. And so we were spent about an hour and a half discussing things with them, what they can do, and
that was
this, that, and the other. And so we did that, then watched the lecture and came home, and I was feeling pretty good when we got home, but boy, I tell you what, Friday morning I woke up and I'm like, fuck, I want to get out of bed. Man, it just ragged me out. And so I was, I just took Friday to kind of recoup and regroup. And this weekend, I've been doing research on records and such to earn a little money while I'm laid up, because I'm going to be relatively incapacitated here for about 6 weeks, I guess. I'll have to take it easy. Some god awful thing like that. Holy crap, 6 weeks.
They glued him shut with super glue.
Yeah.
You got to see the scars.
I don't know. There we go.
Punched him full of bullet holes.
Yeah.
Oh, you should have seen it. They came after me with their big dirk in their hand and they stabbed me, and
And something like that. Actually, I was asleep. I don't know what happened, but they said it was okay. And so anyhow, I've been doing some interesting research using the information I got that last trip to Butte, all these reports, and No problem, Terry. I fight with a midget. And so anyhow, been doing a little work there. I found out something interesting in Montana, at least. There are a large number of places where, looking at the land status map, it's pretty clear that there was a mining claim on federal land there before it was privatized or before it switched from BLM to Forest Service or whatever. And so you can see in the middle of private land and in the middle of the Forest Service, there's these little spots of BLM land that are, about the size of mining claims. And so those would theoretically give you the opportunity to go in and stake something. In the case of the Forest Service, now you don't have to deal with the Forest Service nearly as much. Hey, it's BLM land. What are you talking about? Get out of my property here. Or on private land, where you could actually stake a claim in the middle of somebody's private land. Weird. But
Well, there is some private land, which you have to go to the county to find this out. And BLMs can tell you sometimes too, but some private land, some of these private ranches don't own the mineral rights. And if they're split estate, what they call split estate mineral rights, you can go onto that ranch and stake a claim. So that's the thing. You need to hunt out where the mineral rights stand, because sometimes the landowner didn't own the mineral rights. Somebody who owned the ranch before him might have owned the mineral rights, and they can do a contract with you to mine it or go poking around, and the doesn't have a lot to say about it because of how federal and state law read. They can't keep you from going on it. They don't like it, and you may have to make an agreement with them, keep them happy. But if it's a split estate mineral rights issue, and they've had it would be that they had the right to claim those mineral rights and pay every year like you do for your claim, and they chose not to. So in essence, they didn't stop you from doing it.
yeah, and when you were homesteading, you did not get mineral rights on homestead land.
You did here.
You did?
Yep.
Okay.
You did here because right here they hadn't done the geological surveys to that extent. So if you homesteaded here, you got the timber rights, the mineral right, you got everything.
Okay.
Because they hadn't done the geological assessments before they started opening it up for homestead. Some of the later versions of homesteading toward the end of 1907, 1908 out here, some of those might not have had the mineral rights, but in most cases they did.
I know down by Arivaca, that was the usual situation. You had private land, but they didn't have the mineral rights, and that was why.
Yeah. Here, anything from basically the Missouri River in North Dakota and west, most of the homesteaders owned the mineral rights.
So in theory, if you bought land that had been homesteaded, it would have the mineral rights.
Well, only if
Depending on which.
if the owner withheld the mineral rights, or in a case that, like my grandfather told me, he had they had homesteaded a farm in North Dakota, western North Dakota, and during the 30s and the hard times, the bank asked for the mineral rights, in essence, for the collateral on the borrowing money. And when they paid back their money, the banks were so crooked that you didn't get your mineral rights back. The bankers were such great people, so you never got your that equity of that back.
Isn't that wonderful?
And in 1971 they actually made laws against some of that in the banking industry, but that had happened through history, that once the banker had some collateral on your farm or ranch, he literally owned you.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get that back even if you did pay him off.
Wow. Yeah, Lars, you have a different idea of what fun is than I do. That's for sure.
What's Lars doing?
He says laparoscopic surgery is nice. Gallbladder gone, and you're out the next day.
Yeah.
Had mine done just for fun.
Yeah.
Hey, Patrick, how's it going? Oh,
It's
So-
only fun if you get a copy of the video and you sell tickets online.
that's okay. I'll go. I'll pass on that one.
me
Yeah.
too.
Anyhow, so quick little recap for the people who just showed up. Had my gallbladder out on Tuesday. Went up to Butte on, well, I guess it's
Thursday.
down to Butte. I don't know. Depends on your elevation or latitude, whichever. Went down there to see the lecture, which I posted, and also to talk to the Center for Advanced Metallurgical Processing.
There we go.
And
Camp.
yeah, they have an interesting test that they can run there. It's not something they have done routinely to this point, apparently.
New,
But
all new science.
yeah, they've got a scanning electron microscope, and as the electron beam plays across the surface of the sample, hey Chris, how's it going? As it's hitting the sample, it's getting backscatter and fluorescence and stuff like this. And so by analyzing the induced, electrons and everything else coming off of the sample, it can actually do an analytical analysis pixel by pixel as it's doing that. And good, Chris, we really hope so. And so by analyzing the backscatter, I think it's called electron dispersive microscopy or something like that, but anyhow, then you can determine what the elements are at that particular point and can keep moving. And so as you have say a grain of silica, as it goes across, it's, silicon, oxygen, silicon, oxygen, silicon, oxygen, then it goes to something else. And then as it creates an image essentially that shows you the size, the shape, and the composition of the various particles. And by doing that, it tells you a lot about the material. In the example that they showed us, they took material that had been ground, what did they say, 1/8 inch minus or something like that?
Yeah, they do it at several different levels.
You're right.
Yeah.
They grind at different levels, and then they
go
can
all the
still.
way down from 8 mesh down to like
The neat
400.
part is they already could tell the particle size, so it kind of gave you an idea of where to grind to if you wanted to liberate and not crush the actual thing that you want.
But anyhow, so what they basically did was they took a crushed sample and sieved it to various sizes. And then they took the material from the various sizes, blended it with epoxy resin, let it harden, then cut it and polished it to a smooth surface. So you basically got to get a cross section of all these particles that are in it. Then I guess I have to coat it with, carbon just to get electrically conductive for the electrons. And then they scan it. So this will theoretically allow us to determine, is there gold? Is there gold telluride? What size the particles are, what they're associated with, what they're embedded in, all these sort of things. At what crush size are the gold particles now separated from the other particles? And, when are they still in it? And no, Chris, they said carbon, not gold. And so by doing that, you can get a tremendous amount of information. You're not only getting kind of a mineralogical analysis of the rock, but you're also getting a metallurgical analysis of where the gold is and what form it is, what size particles it is, what it's associated with, and the whole thing all in one test. Now, this is not cheap. I believe they said the estimate was like $800.
$800 test.
Yeah, it's about $800. So that is, not exactly cheap. But when you consider all the other tests you would have to run to get that amount of information, it's probably quite a bargain.
Well, yeah, and they can probably come up with, put a guy on that, and within a day or two have that information. That's what's, neat about it.
Yeah,
is in a short time period, they can literally tell you, yeah, the gold, the particle size is this, and the associated minerals that you're going to find the gold in that atmosphere or environment are these.
And we're also
I
going to
mean-
get a quote on a flotation test.
that will be later. Yeah, let's see. From Department of the Interior, what's going to be the deal with us miners? I don't know, Gold Miner 49er.
Yeah, we're
Not
Let's
hopeful.
see. What do you know about order number? I guess that's Executive Order 3395, little one.
Haven't
No,
seen it
it's
yet.
Department of Interior 3395. Can you look it up when you get a chance?
Yep. Department of Interior 3395.
Hey, Ziaxio. 3395.
Okay.
Department of Interior.
Head over to Department of Interior. Is it on the Federal Register or is it elsewhere? Any idea?
49er, do you know, is it in the Federal Register or not yet? Anyhow, so once we get the information back from that test, that should help direct us to determine what other tests need to be done to guide us to an effective and economic extraction technique, assuming such is possible. And one of the interesting things when I talked to Rick number 2, who is apparently the flotation specialist there, about how this gold from Montana B just doesn't like to settle at all. He was saying, oh, if it's like that, it's really fine, and it's going to have to be column floated, not standard flotation cells. For whatever reason, he said that the smaller the particles, the smaller the bubbles you need to pick them up. Don't know why. I'll learn it later theoretically, but he said with the real small particles, that would indicate that it's probably going to have to be a column flotation setup instead of a standard flotation cell. And so as this process goes on, hopefully we'll be able to, keep you guys kind of informed on how it's going and how it works and this and that and the other. Not much metal detecting, just the quick briefs of what we did last week. I don't know, Zioxio, if that's silica or what, because if you notice that the material seems almost to polish like it's metallic. I mean, I don't know if there's a lot of specular hematite there or whatever, but when I cross-cut that with the basically it was an abrasive cutoff wheel, gosh, it looked almost like porous steel in terms of the surface. It was very unusual looking.
So I'm going to have to download the actual file later on your computer, but I'm reading the details on it right now.
Okay. And oh yeah, it's definitely got hard and soft spots. That's true. But I say that hard it's like a porous hard matrix, and then there's the usual. There's the usual soft, limonite looking stuff in between.
Fairly high content of iron already, didn't it? Though.
Oh yeah,
20%.
33%.
Okay. So
Yeah.
well, see some of that from the heating of the saw blade. The iron might have shown up as literally splaying the iron across the sample.
Metal detecting, one thing you can do to roast is just build a fire and use a cast iron skillet. Just throw it in there and just let it heat.
Roasting sulfides.
Yeah, for roasting sulfides.
Yeah. Just stay upwind of it anyway, in case there's something in there you don't want to breathe.
Yeah, it's the Oxio. I'm not sure what you're cutting with in terms of the tool itself, but if you're going with like a 4-inch angle grinder, you can also get diamond blades at just a Home Depot.
Yep.
That are designed to cut masonry and stuff.
Yeah. Tile cutting blade will cut a rock.
Yeah.
Diamond bit. A tile saw actually works pretty good for cutting small rocks.
Yeah, well, metal detecting, sometimes you just got to do a little field work.
Ooh,
Yeah.
This does not sound good. Just from what I'm seeing so far, this does not sound good.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect existing ongoing operations under valid leases and does not preclude the issuance of leases, permits, and any other authorities, authorizations by those confirmed or acting officials specified. But very few acting and confirmed officials are allowed. It's a 60-day moratorium on every.
Moratorium on
they're mainly
plans
trying
of
to go after
operations
the
and
oil-
everything.
Right, they're
At
trying
least
to go
60
after
days.
oil.
And as part of at least 60 days, there's a moratorium on publishing or causing to be published or aiding in the publication of any notice in the Federal Register, including but not limited to notices of proposed or final agency action and actions taken in accordance with the national environment. What this means, people, is like everything else the Biden administration is doing, they don't want it on the Federal Register, which is against the law, by the way, so that nobody can comment on it and nobody knows what they're doing.
So basically, they're making such a bottleneck that nobody can get anything done. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, they're also not issuing, revising, or amending resource management plans under Section 202 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. They're not approving plans of operation or amending existing plans of operation under General Mining Law of 1872. They're not granting rights of way, easements, or any conveyances of property or interest in property, including land sales or exchanges or notices to proceed under previous surface use authorizations that will authorize ground disturbing activities.
Yeah, so basically they've said, get the hell off our land.
In a nutshell, the Biden administration is putting a total gag order in, and they're doing a full review of everybody they've got working there right now, with the assumption being that anybody they don't like is going to be booted and Biden's peons and puppets will be put in their place.
Yeah, Ethan, I think you ought to take a worst case scenario look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, hopefully it's no more than the political stunt. I haven't seen anything they're doing that's just a political stunt, in my opinion, at this point. Yeah, they're pretty extreme as far as I'm concerned. So we shall see. It's just
I will download the PDF, people, and read it this week.
Eva will have a report by next Sunday. But no, it doesn't look good. So anyhow,
they're going to get rid of anybody that's in our favor.
Yeah, I'd say they're.
Well, they were trying to shut down the oil company stuff. That was their big thing.
Yeah, that may be the
it'll
big
still
thing.
drift over into mining and everything else, but
Yeah.
they wanted to stop some of that permitting in Alaska, because they had permitting to go in and do some drilling in some places that have been off limits for a long time, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to stop it.
Yeah, but they were just stopping everything.
Yeah, federal leases. Yeah, it affects New Mexico. It just about bankrupts the state.
Well,
Oxio 2,000 parts per million arsenic.
you get what you vote for.
Don't lick your fingers.
Exactly, minor 49er. You're not going to get nothing probably for the next 4 years.
Well,
Yep. So, well, I wouldn't call that tons, Chris. I mean, it's substantial quantities.
it's there.
But yeah, that's it's not looking pretty good. Yeah, exactly. But it's pretty much what I expected from these people. Forrest says, I warned you not to fall asleep with the doctors. They steal parts. Yeah.
I think $4 gasoline's conservative for what we're going to be facing here in another month or two.
Which is why you should get the Get Upside app and get rebates if it's available in your state. We have it here.
Yeah.
We get
Yeah,
rebates.
I think you're going to see oil, like gold and things, you're going to see them start going up, hyperinflating, and it's going to have a bad effect.
Well, it goes through everything. If the price of oil goes up, the price of everything goes up.
Yeah. A lot of things are made of oil.
So, and once you start getting inflation rising, then we have the question of what is going to happen to everything else. Well, all the money they've pumped into the system over the last year.
The M2 money supply is absolutely ridiculous right now.
It could just
a couple of months ago.
take off and drive all prices, just broad-based inflation
The M2 money supply is vertical, people.
So, yeah, I'm not too cheerful that things are going to go smooth and hunky dory, but we're Americans and we'll deal with it. And we may not be able to discuss exactly how we wish to deal with it, but we'll come up with a plan. Invest in silver. Don't have a problem with that at all. Winging it if you can find some.
Yeah,
You can find
it's
it.
getting harder to find.
Just don't buy paper. Don't buy a certificate of silver. But if you can buy actual silver, that would be good. Same with
If
gold.
you do buy a certificate, make sure
Actually,
you get it from
even
a-
pure copper bars, you can buy 40-pound bars of copper, and you just watch the price within the next year of copper will double. We'll have $8 a pound copper probably.
Well, the problem with copper as opposed to gold and silver, though, is it's an industrial metal.
It's also a store of wealth for countries.
Not nearly as much.
No,
as
not as much as gold and silver,
Because
but it is a store of wealth. Chinese actually store a lot of copper for
could
value.
be. But the thing is, you also need it for construction.
Oh yeah. You need it for everything. You want electric cars and cell phones, you need copper.
If you do buy paper silver, buy it from a top-rated company and read the terms very carefully first to see how soon you can cash it in and when they must give you physical delivery, and then you cash that stuff in.
Yeah, I'd rather get the silver itself right now.
Right, no third party.
I don't think you can count on any rules or promises at the present time. I think anything could go south or sideways or upside down in a heartbeat at the present time. I feel very, very insecure. Zioxio says $33.95 might cause troubles for the silver mine he's supposed to be working at this summer. Well, it certainly could.
It very well could.
I mean, if you don't have final permits, you're basically screwed.
Well, I have the order in front of me right now, but it's going to take a while to read, so the report will be next Sunday.
No
during
problem,
live
little one.
stream.
We understand. So that's an important piece of data. Unfortunately, not a happy joy data. And we will continue operating as if we'll be able to get around it in one way or another, or someday or another. In the meantime, I would suggest keeping your head down and don't ask for permission if you don't absolutely have to currently, because what they don't know, they can't regulate, and we'll wait till things settle down. This is really a very unusual time.
This is historic.
I say the unpredictability here is like something I've never seen before.
Oh, apparently Bozifornia is a problem for us.
In terms of what, little one?
California liberals have destroyed the Montana housing market, the area around Bozifornia. The prices have gone up so high that homelessness is rising in the local population.
Well, let's chase all the Californians out. Then we'll have plenty of homes.
It's happening everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much, Matt. So anyhow, that's kind of the basic overview of what
that was the week.
The week in prospecting. If anyone has a real quick question here, Ethan says it's happening in Idaho, then go ahead and put it up. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Jim here in a little bit to do some more further information on basically placer prospecting.
I think I'll take it tonight from a point of, a lot of, I've had some questions on, okay, where do I dig a test hole? Well, and I think I'm going to use a couple scenarios, one for sure here, and I've got it drawn out, and we'll go over what we can learn by basically our small map and how we can start to predict where the places that dig that test hole, that first test hole, or possibly just do some high banking on an edge that would lead us to some virgin ground that the old miners didn't get. So I think I'll start off from that point, as we'll start with a scenario and build with it a little bit.
Sure.
And then I'll go into project feasibility. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, leading it into either next Sunday or whenever we can, doing literally starting to plan a mine. How do we plan to make the, to do a mine and do our permitting? So I am going to bring the board out. Can you tip that camera, Keith, just a
Sure.
little? If I
What do you want to
this
do?
Here?
Down, up,
Yeah,
what?
go down and see if you can get most of this. Okay, that's not too bad. Yeah, you're just catching that. Slide that forward.
See what happens.
Now.
Yeah, I can do this.
All right, I can hold it up just a little bit.
That's okay. Watch this. I think that's got it. There you go.
There
Put it down.
Yeah, you got it. You got it pretty much all of it. All right, we've got the creek that we're looking at, an existing creek. And the edges here I just put as the sloped edges to what they mined in the old time. These are the rock piles coming up the drainage. And as we walk the drainage, we start to notice specific spots in those side slopes that we've got some boulders. And then we go back and we got gravel, and then we've got boulders and we've got gravel. And up here we got some boulders. And we walk both sides of that drainage and look for that. We look for the outcrops. We got outcrops of rock here. Those will act as controls of how this drainage was initially laid down. So we can learn some interesting things. The green line here is basically the outside bench of what is the drainage and what's actually the side slope of the hill. What would be a limit? So that's a control also. Well, we can learn some things here as we look at the rock piles. If you start to notice, the rock piles will go from small rock and small cobble to all of a sudden you'll have a pile of big rocks. And you go up the drainage and you'll have pretty much all smaller rocks in a section, and then small rocks and bigger cobble and then bigger boulders again. And when you see that on rock piles, start to look at the sides of the drainage, because that starts to tell you a pattern of, we know what our controls are as far as exposed bedrock here and up here. What we can learn really fast from looking at this is the gold was laid down in some pattern like this, back through our boulders, somewhere out in here, and it came back across into here, and then way down at the bottom here, we've boulders again. So there's a good chance that this actually went out in here somewhere and come back around into the drainage. So this is how the original ancient channel was laid in this drainage. And we can learn that from the rocks if we pay attention to rock sizes. So the things we don't know is we don't know what the control here is. So that would be a good place for a possible test hole to just see why did this creek come across under here and come back? Maybe it's high bedrock in here. Maybe it's some more exposed that didn't quite, get exposed completely. But we can start to learn from where the old timers worked. Their workings can tell us a lot about how that original channel we're looking for with the bigger gold in where it lies. And then what you can do is start to say, we know the channel came across here into this rock pile and start high banking some of this material in here, and then maybe come back against this hard bedrock, this exposed bedrock, and dig a small hole in there, or metal detect even. Sometimes metal detecting along those banks in those areas, if you start to pick up some nice gold, that really confirms that what you're doing here and reading this is true. That's where it's at. And sometimes it's as much as just panning the gravels close to those rock exposures in that drainage. Anywhere along the side, you start to see bigger rocks. Work around those bigger rocks. But if you can read a pattern in the drainage, and that's why your field notebook and walking up and down, and even if this is only, just say it's a quarter of a mile up and down, can tell you a lot about the drainage and where the obvious spots to look and do that first test hole. If you want to find gold and you want to find the bigger gold, one of the problems a lot of guys make is they go somewhere in the drainage and start into some old sand or something. And yeah, you're going to get flood gold, because anytime there's heavy water in here, it's going to move whatever gold is in the gravels. Ideally, you want to try to find that ancient channel through there, though, and then how it turned and where it went. And if you start to get into that, you're going to get into some really, really interesting, areas of mining and a lot of fun. What do you got for questions, Keith?
No questions right now. They're talking about dredging in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
And basically the regulations haven't changed much at the moment. So they're just going to basically pretend like nothing has changed and see what happened.
Locally here, Montana, we may be safe too. But so anywhere you get exposures, upstream exposure to bedrock, definitely metal detector, pan, high bank, crevice, those areas to find gold, because if that channel came across and then hit that control, there's a good chance that control kind of locked up some bigger gold or some nicer gold somewhere along there. And then the other thing that this can tell us, when we look at how that gold laid down in there, is we have a potential of a mineable placer literally right here, we basically have a mining pad right there that we could take out of there probably. And we could also modify it a little bit, and we could do the same thing over here. We could try to find where the gold stops, and we could mine all the way through here, because there's a good chance, unless there's a big high or something really funny about bedrock right in here, there's a good chance that the overflow carried gold within that drainage farther down. It just depends on what this control here is as to what happened there. We know that it turned the drainage because we see the rock piles in the side banks on the creek, and we see the rock piles in the middle of the drainage where they mined. So we know that something controlled right there. So it starts to give you places to kind of try to identify where you could possibly, work along there with a pan, with a pick, a shovel, a metal detector, or even possibly high bank little areas to start to identify decent values. Not just little gold that, you see 2 colors in a pan. You want to see, 25 colors or 40 colors or actual little pickers. So you want to try to see if you can identify, and not all drainages are going to be, this direct, but the big rocks on the edges sometimes will start to show where the high energy channel was when that was laid down.
Some guy named Old Dirty Goat Mining says, I am also a professional placer miner, just ask Jim.
Yeah.
You know him, huh?
I know him.
Okay.
Yep, I know him.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's trying to start to read the drainage, and the more you do this, the more drainages you start to walk, and you start to notice things about how the old timers went. Normally they just followed water, unless they started bringing in ditches and trying to get at some of this maybe outside of that realm. But you can learn a lot by looking at those rock piles, and metal detect those rock piles as well, because if they were using what they call a silage fork to clean out their sluice boxes, and they a lot of times did that, if there was a 3 or a 5 ounce nugget in that sluice box, a lot of times they forked it up and it went right over their shoulder into the rock pile. So sometimes the rock piles can have some really interesting big chunks of gold in them, or quartz and gold, that the sluice box didn't hold because they were shoveling their sluice boxes with basically a pitchfork.
So that would be forking up, right?
Yep.
Now
they forked up
on these coarse, the high energy channel there. Why wouldn't they just dig into the bank where there was that high energy channel? Sometimes
the guys realized that because they got to a point where the gold ran out. But if this is all gold bearing, and there's a lot of times the whole placer has got gold in it, but if you can follow the high energy channel and get in the right areas, you've got economic value gold versus running some ground, which the old timers, my guess is somewhere about here, and until they got up to here where they caught the channel again. This whole area may have had gold, but it wasn't what they were hitting when they got here in maybe, this area above this, wherever that channel crossed from big rocks to big rocks. they had a really extreme amount of gold, really good gold,
Mhm.
and then they'd get out of it. And then they'd pick it up again because of the way it braided in the drainage, the ancient channel. A lot of times this whole thing literally can have gold though. You could go out here and dig a test hole somewhere and you'd have gold because of the way things washed and went, but it won't be the big gold that you really are looking for. It might be $4 a yard. So yeah, there's gold there, but it's not economic.
Now, if you were looking at old bucket line dredge spoils, and you were going to metal detect, so would you essentially recommend metal detecting the larger rocks in the?
Well, yeah, because basically the tops of the piles always, because the last thing out of the hole is what's on top of the pile.
Uh-huh.
So however deep they were digging, the last material that went on that pile out the back of that machine is on top.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it where they actually overcut with drag lines, especially if they're running drag lines. They overcut the pay zone and threw it on top of the pile.
Mm-hmm.
And then they mined everything from there down. But they took just enough of that pay zone when they were stripping. They overstripped and they put it on top of the piles. So yeah, for metal detecting, it's an awesome place to be looking. The tops of the piles.
Okay.
As far as in an environment where the dredges ran, the other areas of possible potential would really be the edges where the dredge only went out so far to, and maybe left an area because they tended to run in straight lines.
They were pretty big and cumbersome. They couldn't.
Right, they couldn't do
close.
right. They couldn't do a little winged area or something. They had to work kind of in straight lines. And any faces where they stopped the dredge possibly, because you don't know what the reasons for stopping the dredge were. Unfortunately, a lot of places they ran dredges, you're talking about a lot of depth.
Uh-huh.
The gold you're looking for is probably deep.
Uh-huh.
Versus on these small drainages where they literally used water and ground sluiced the drainage. They'd move their sluice box, and sometimes the rock piles will be at 45-degree herringbones to the bank. If that's the case, that was definitely ground sluiced. They washed the bank down right directly into their sluice boxes or a flume and took the gravels and pitched the rocks off, like I say, with a silage fork, basically a close tined fork. Somebody walked the sluice boxes and threw the rocks out.
Okay.
But you're looking for opportunities and hints and clues as to how they mined it, what they did, and the opportunities that exist outside of all the areas, because they stayed close to water normally, because to go upstream somewhere, build a ditch in here, to bring water down to mine, this 5 acres down here, sometimes they did that. Here they did it quite a bit. But in a lot of cases, it cost too much money. It took a whole season to dig that ditch. So they lost a year of mining in order to run a water channel in there. So they didn't. They just worked the easy stuff up the drainage.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean they were on gold. They were in and out of it. More, the way I drew this, they were in and out of gold.
Well, sometimes they might just continue proceeding along just to maintain essentially an effective working face, even if it wasn't that good of material, because
right.
Otherwise, they got to move the sluices back and forth
the
and
creek,
change
or
this.
it gets the engineering sometimes got to be more complex than they wanted to do. So they basically used the existing drainage, how you see it, how we'd see it today, and they mined it, But the thing is they didn't really mine. They only mined a percentage of it, because your outside curve areas, like over in here and then down in here, none of that's ever been mined, and that could be really productive, because that ran around and come out down there where them rocks show up again.
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like when I do hard rock prospecting, I'm looking for mines,
right?
Because they're easy to spot,
right?
And then I'm looking to see where they stopped or what they didn't do or whatever. And you're doing exactly the same thing But in placers, where you're using the easily observable remnants
Features
of their works,
Yep.
to say, okay, there must have been gold here because they didn't shovel all those rocks for fun.
When you walk the drainage, you want to find this line at the edge of the hill to what would have been the edge of the drainage at one time. The current edge of the drainage is this bank where they quit mining, down here. If you can identify the curvature of the edge of the actual drainage on the outside, you can start to see the potential. But what you don't know is, did they gut the mineral deposit, or did they actually completely miss through it? And in a lot of cases, they went in and out of it because that's how they mined it, and they missed those curves and those high energy channels. A small area, even if you're high banking, a small area can hold a lot of gold. Two guys literally could make a lot of money just shoveling into a high banker if you can get on the high energy zone and be able to work with that. And some of these aren't that deep. The bench on top here might be 10 feet above the water, but if you can start in from the old workings into that bank, you got a spot to stack rocks behind you as you pull out the gravels.
Okay. Now Jeff Bybee asks, is the fork out piles along the sluice box, or did the fork out above the sluice on a ditch leading to the sluice? As I understand, they're basically removing the coarser rocks from the sluice box because they were obstructing drains.
Jeff, most cases they were trying to wash all their rock, as far as anything smaller than maybe a foot, everything smaller than a football, say. Usually the hand stacking you see, if you see hand stacking, they were stacking the big rocks in walls or rows, and then all that smaller rock, because you'll see a pile that'll be real consistent, like just baseball sized rocks. Those were forked out of the sluice box. Okay. Usually, or shovel maybe, but usually they used like a silage fork. It's a narrow tined fork that's fairly wide, and they could just walk down that sluice box and throw out a handful, and then throw out another handful, and it kept that sluice box running because those guys were pushing a lot of gravel basically down those boxes, and the biggest thing was rocks piling up in some point of the boxes. So, any questions, Keith?
No, it's just, to me, it's interesting to see how the similarities between the hard rock and the placer come together in what you're doing and what I do, because in a vein, which would be like your channel here, the concentration fluctuates dramatically.
Yep.
And with that, basically you have to do sampling on a fairly tight spacing in some way or another. Now, if you had like a 3 foot wide vein, and like these guys here, they had to do this. Well, when you're mining a tunnel, you can't do it a foot wide. You can't get through it.
No, you have to have your width.
So you have to take extra. But as you advance, if you keep those records, then you're getting a good idea of where the gold is, especially if you segregate and hand sort. A lot of people nowadays don't understand how much the old timers used to, actually segregate the rock material by the color, the look, and everything else, and say, okay, this has got the look that we want, or I can see some gold in this, or whatever. I mean, that mine in South Africa that the guy's talking about, the tailings are running 1% gold.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty easy to see the gold there, because when you're talking
able to figure that
2 or 3% gold, right, you can just see it in the rock. That's not going to be a problem.
Like I say, if you walk, identify your drainage, and this could be a short distance if you're coming out for the weekend or something. Pick out a distance in here and go walk up the drainage and walk back down and make notes of what would have controlled water in this area And, because a lot of times the bedrock was a control that's easily identifiable. The water is coming down and that it's blasting off of that, which is making it turn, just like putting a board in, in a flow and moving the flow over. And if you could start to identify where the flow more than likely went, you could start to predict areas that could have economic potential or even just weekend potential, working in on the big rocks or somewhere in that area, and just working that bank in that area. And then when that kind of peters out, go up the stream farther and find the next place where it did that. But whether you're recreational mining or you're actually trying to lay it out for actual mine patterns that you're going to mine, just walking that drainage and paying attention to rock sizes, what the piles look like, where's the bedrock exposures, and ideally, if you can get up here somewhere on a hill and look down the drainage, you can also start to identify from up in the top of the drainage, where to you, what's a straight line that the water would have shot? It would go straight to the right, and then it's going to deflect off of something over there, and then it's going to go to the left. And I can show you quite a few drainages that are very similar to this, mined through, but they actually only mined up 20% of the actual drainage.
Okay, for Liz Lincoln says he's basically wondering how much maneuvering did they do with the dredges, when they had a high energy zone or this, as something they were trying to get. How much could they maneuver, or were they?
They could cut, a length of, let's just say that shovels were out there, 40 feet in front of that dredge. They could cut that 40 feet as they came up, and then they could maneuver to the left or to the right and work in at a little bit of an angle. The biggest problem with the dredge for maneuverability was actually the tailings piling up behind them on the output. And if the tailings started piling too high behind them, they couldn't go left and right too much anymore. They had to go straight ahead again. And that's why a lot of times you really see it in patterns of all straight ahead, and then they turn the dredge around at the upper, because a dredge could dredge both ways. They could dredge upstream and keep a pond, and they could actually dredge downstream and keep a pond behind them that they were floating in. Downstream sometimes was a little harder, but a lot of times if they started a drainage where they built the dredge was somewhere on the top, and they worked down, and then they worked back up, and then they worked down. And you can usually tell by the way the rocks are piled, because you'll have a feathering of the rocks, and you just look at the angle of the feathering and you can tell which way the dredge was going on the pile.
Okay. Jeff said, how long a sluice box is common? I presume that means for ground sluicing. Was there a particular size, or just whatever the drainage was? Or?
Some drainages, depending on how the guys were working together and stuff, sometimes they ran flume boxes up the drainage, and they literally had guys in all different areas shoveling and filling those. It basically was a sluice box that could have been a half a mile long. They divert the creek into that box, and then everybody along the line is shoveling into it. And at the end of the week, they divided up, or whenever they cleaned up, maybe it was 2 weeks, they divided up the gold based on how many feet of claim each guy had. So there were some interesting ways guys did it. I mean, ideally on a modern day plant, you want probably close to 20 feet of sluice box, depending on the yardage, how fast you're pushing yardage. A 1 foot sluice box will handle 15 yards an hour. So if your plant is capable of, 50 yards an hour, you need to get that width of that sluice box out there. And then if you've got really, really fine gold, you want to start with, the narrowest part that you can, let's say 30-inch wide box. And then as it goes down to the last section, you want to flare it out and spread that water out a little more, so that you can pick up that fine gold in a finer carpet farther down in that box. And you'll recover a lot of stuff that normally people wouldn't.
Yeah, blind sight. A lot of these dredges, they all had some kind of screening. They couldn't put everything over their internal sluices. And so whatever gets rejected off those screens goes to tailings.
Goes to the rock piles.
And so the big
Yep.
chunks of gold will go out
yeah.
to the rock piles.
Some
that's
of
for sure.
some of those dredges they actually screwed up because they had too tight of screens in them, and sometimes they knew that they were only going after the fine gold, and they didn't care about 3/4 ounce nuggets, because the majority of the deposit, let's just say 80% of the deposit is fine gold. They tailored that dredge screen to 80% of to that 80%. That other little part that was going out, yes, it was money, but that isn't what they were trying to go after. I mean, in any mining environment, you need to tailor the equipment to the environment that you're working in, and the particle size and the rock sizes you're dealing with, and how good you need it to be cleaned. If you've got clay and sticky stuff, you have to tailor the equipment to the site, to that environment.
Yeah, that's one of the things is when you're doing economics, when you're trying to make money, you're going to have losses. So your question is, how much does it cost to avoid a loss?
Well,
if that costs more than the loss, you just take the loss and go on.
Well, in some cases, if 90% of the gold you're getting is easily be caught in the sluice box, is that other 10% of fines and that you're not getting, is it worth a $25,000 Knudsen bowl, or putting in, a system that you can get that other percentage? That, it comes down to economics. If it's going to cost too much to buy the equipment to recover that extra couple percent, then it's a no.
Well, it's not just buying the equipment, it's running the equipment.
Well, right. Babysitting, how does it plug up your whole system if it goes down? It's another piece of equipment that's running. A lot of things play into how you're going to mine it, what your recovery, how you get your recovery. And it's got to be on an economic scale when it gets to that it has to work. You don't want to spend $5 to make one. Ideally, you want to spend $5 and hope you make 6, or you make 10, or you make 20.
A couple hundred would be nice.
Well, right. But you got to be very careful when you get to those last percentages. Is what does it cost to recover it?
Now, Prospector Trip was telling us that if you Google map Featherville, Idaho, or Sumter, Oregon, or all these others, you can actually see the dredge tailings from above, and that might be, in some ways, an easier way to see what happened.
Well, definitely. A lot of times, Google Maps, even actual photos of the area, can tell you a lot and can help you to try to figure out where's the edges of the old drainage. Because just because the dredge went there doesn't mean they got the whole drainage either. But like I say, normally if a dredge went there, if it was really truly a dredge, it's probably deep. The gold that you're going to have to look for is going to be down there, 30 feet, 40 feet. And theoretically, what we're looking for, even in my size operation, I would really like to have bedrock at 20 feet or less. Occasionally you're going to have 30-foot drop overs in your bedrock, but it's going to be so much easier, especially if I have to strip the top, 12 feet of that. I only have 12 feet to strip, and then everything else can go to my wash plant. The lower 6 feet or 8 feet or 10 feet can go through my plant.
Now, another thing that I like your input on here is, I don't know, I presume most of you people have watched the video, or at least seen the video was up on what Rob McCulloch, his lecture. And one thing that he mentioned that I've never even heard before was if you have, tight clay soils, if you just pick them up and stack them on the surface and let them sit there for a season or so, it oxidizes the clay and causes it to lose its stickiness.
Right.
And now it'll break up.
It slacks.
And have you ever used that?
I've never used that technique, but I know of places here where they did that. And here's here's how the old timers, even when they were using drag lines in the 30s and 40s, operated. Is they would identify the area they were going to mine. They'd go in and take off the timber and the upper vegetation and get that out of the way. Then they would come in with the drag line and strip down to the top of their pay layer. So they get the stripping done, and they'd work on getting their ponds done and everything. And then they wouldn't come back till spring the next year. And when they came back in the spring, they could set up the wash plant and get everything all ready. They could start peeling some of the pay zone out and piling it. And that way, the minute they turn the wash plant on, they could be feeding that wash plant. And that pattern, they may only done for 2 months. And as soon as they get that pad done, they move the wash plant, they clean up that area, they do the reclamation and push back at least so they have a road. And then they start their stripping procedure for next year again. So they're not mining all year long. They're running their wash plant only on the economic ground for like a 2-month period of time or so, maybe 3, depending on their water. Because here, a lot of times you get into September, your water table starts dropping, depending on the elevation you're at and that. So they had a routine that they did that always kept them, when they turned the wash plant on, they were mining. They weren't waiting to strip, and they weren't trying to do 14 things at one time. They were mining. They already had the stripping done. They had everything laid out and patterned for how they were going to operate for two solid months.
Yeah, that makes sense, but I've just never heard of just
slacking clay. Well, there's some environments, especially in mineral, which from underground, you can get into a kind of a clay, slimy.
Not many places I've worked.
Haven't you?
Oh, no.
Wait till you get into some of these mines up here. But you can get into material that you literally do have to dry it out or try to figure out how to get that in. Because if you're running big, huge, nasty chunks of clay through your trommel or wash plant, it's going to pick up gold as it's leaving.
Yeah.
It's not going to leave you the gold in the sluice box. So you can't do that. So what they would do is they'd do their strip. And then if that material that they were going to run for next year, we had a lot of clay, they would strip it and pile it and then set their wash plant up where they could feed that pile next year through that wash plant. Mm-hmm. So they would give that clay time to expand and contract with the freezing, thawing, and moisture and everything. It would slack it just enough that they could get it to run then without balling up.
One thing that we ran into in an open pit mine that I was at the Goldfields Mesquite mine was we had a lot of material that we were stripping. It was just waste, but it had a lot of mica in it. And so it was very slippery internally.
Right.
And the pit slope had to be shallowed out dramatically
to hold the hill.
And when I was running the loader, I couldn't get firm footing because the stuff would just squish out from under my tires. And when you've got roughly 200,000 plus pounds balanced on the front 2 tires,
you're soft.
Enormous amount of weight there. And it would just, squish. And I constantly having to fix up the pit floor.
Back drag your tracks.
Yeah, and we had areas there where we literally had to dig it 3 or 4 feet deeper and then throw in rock.
Right, to drive on.
Just so that it wouldn't get ridiculous. The trucks could
you'll see that in placer
reasonably well. Yeah. But that was one of the things that I saw. Now, when I worked underground, we were about 1,700 feet deep in soft sandstone, and that stuff was plastic at those pressures. You could actually see the drifts changing size over time. They get smaller. And the room my ex-wife used to work in, she said one day it shrank 2 inches in one shift. Because she said, I swear this thing's getting smaller. I said, well, take a tape measure. She comes back next day and said, it shrank 2 inches this shift. Because once you started pulling enough support out,
you lose.
She comes back next day and said, it shrank 2 inches this shift. Because once you started pulling enough support out,
you lose. Right.
It comes in.
Gravity's and the pressure on the rock is interesting.
Yeah. the San Manuel mine north of Tucson, they did what they call block caving, where basically they would go underneath the ore body,
Cave it down.
and then drive a grid of tunnels, then go up, and then basically undercut the whole thing, let it start caving.
Yep.
And he said if you didn't pull those, an area, at least once a week, the pressure would build up to the point where it would start collapsing.
Or it would blow. Rock can blow.
Not at those depths. Yeah, at those depths, they were only about 2,000 feet deep.
Okay.
It wasn't rock burst type stuff, but I mean, and their standard rail tunnels had 24 inches of concrete in them. That was their standard thing. 24 inches of high strength shotcrete was their standard lining for the rail tunnels.
Well, if it had that much pressure on it, I suppose.
Yeah. And Zioxio says the Vortex Yogo Sapphires lets theirs weather for a season or two. Yeah, Kevin, clay likes to grab gold. Absolutely. It loves gold. Gold likes to stick to clay. I'm sure there's some chemical surface charge reason for it that Chris can probably tell us about. But from an observational standpoint, it sticks. And this might be an interesting phenomenon to use in a very fine recovery system where you're going for real fine gold.
Zioxio, yeah, Rob was talking about that the other night in his deal too. On the sapphires, a lot of times they would size gravels bigger than the sapphires they figured on taking out, and they'll pull all that gravel and pile it for next year. Because then when they run it, they can actually get those sapphires out of that clayey, talky material that they're pulling them out of. Yeah, that's interesting.
What was that little one?
Potentially stupid question. Does gold stick to like dry fired clay? Like if you made a sluice out of clay?
No, not dry fired clay.
Just wet shell.
Yeah, wet clay.
Blind sight, on some of that, Idaho did have good gold in areas. There's some truth to that it was lead, silver, and other things. But they did have good gold. And when you look at those old records, you have to put them in context to today, too. If they only pulled out $100 worth of gold, some miner somewhere, that $100 worth of gold at that time in 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, that was $16 an ounce. Okay. So it was quite a few ounces to get to the $100 versus today at, $1,750 or $1,800 per ounce gold. Some of that ground could be very, very productive if it was tested correctly and planned. There's gold there.
And Volca Bear wants to know, where did Jim find that gold golf ball?
Doing a lot of digging. It was close to bedrock. It was, within an inch of bedrock.
Montana here?
Yeah, it was here in Montana. Okay. It was on one of our.
Okay. So, as I say, that's once you've got a good idea of what you're going to be doing and stuff, and then you got to make up a plan of what you need to do. What are some of the most important things that most people might not think of in terms of what do you have to take into account when you're putting together your mining plan? Like I know spare parts was one.
Yeah. Or you've identified the drainage, you've dug some test holes, you have valuable economic gold, and you can start to identify the depth of gravels that you've got and calculate yardage based on, linear feet of drainage and width. You can figure the values out and say, okay, if this is all mineable like we think it is, there's X amount of dollars here to work with. At today's value, you can't worry about the fact that it might be going up or it might be coming down. You have to use a real number. Even if you went on the conservative side and said, okay, the low in gold is 1,700 and you use 1,700, if it's still economic at that point, you have a mine. So then you start basically looking at it from the feasibility as we've got our gold in our tests, we've figured out our volumes of gravel. Now, what what are our mining problems, first of all? And it could be clay, it could be cemented gravels, it could be depth to bedrock. The amount of black sand in our samples, if we had a lot of black sand, how are we going to deal with that in a sluice box environment on our plant? The size of the boulders that you might be pulling up, can you deal with them, or do you need bigger equipment? You need to work out some of those problems. Then you start looking at the washing problems of same type of thing. How sticky is the clay, and is it going to just ball up and haul the gold out of the trommel instead of washing through the sluice? The black sand again. Your ratios of boulders to gravel. You have what I call a swell factor. If you're digging all boulders, when they're buried in the ground and all locked together, there's a cubic yard, let's say, of boulders. The minute you start freeing those up and trying to pile them on a pile somewhere, the swell factor could be 50%. So for every yard of boulders you're taking out, when you put it on the pile, suddenly you got 2 yards of boulders. So you need an area to put that. Do you have an area to put that material? How much topsoil do you have? How much overburden gravel do you have to take out? Where can you pile that? You have to start thinking of all the reasons that this could be bad. This is going to take time, and you got to account for the dollars per yard of moving every one of those yards, and the dollars per yard of putting it back in, doing the cleanup of the site, the reclamation. So that becomes kind of your next thing, is the reclamation, and how do you plan the landscaping of putting it back. And especially when you're in a riparian area, in a creek drainage, you tend to have different species of shrubs and flowers and things than you do when you get up the bank where it's drier. So you have to plan how you're going to put that all back after you've mined through it. And then seeding costs of seeding it back with whatever, like Forest Service has their own seed blend, or can you get by with a pasture mix? Something cheaper. So you got to start to look at those factoring costs of what's all that going to be. Then your permitting costs and permitting cost of time. If it's going to take 2 years to permit that site to mine it, what's the cost value of that time? I mean, maybe it's something that you want to definitely go ahead and start permitting and putting your mining plan all together with your permits. But okay, now you got 2 years where you're not going to be mining, at least on that site. Do you already have another site picked out and you're working on that? Or, so that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to work ahead of myself somewhere in the future on sites and identifying ground.
You don't have to stop instantly.
Well, right, no, that's fine.
But do you have like rough numbers where you're looking at something like I have 1 ounce to the ton, 1 foot wide is kind of a minimum. I can make money at that.
Right.
What do you look at in terms of saying this is something I could probably make money versus this is something I probably can't make money?
I know from experience, I know that if I'm digging, let's just say my deepest to bedrock is 12 feet. Mm-hmm. Okay. Easily reached with a tractor backhoe, a mini excavator, easy digging, 12 feet deep, no problem. So my excavating cost isn't that bad.
What would it be
that point?
Roughly?
Well, if you really want numbers, if you're doing a mine plan, what I like to do is go down to the Cat store or John Deere or whoever and get their rental sheet of what they rent equipment for. Mm-hmm. Because that gives you a realistic value in today's dollars of what it's going to cost per hour for that machine. Even if you go to an auction and buy a machine for, $15,000, there's still an operational cost there that you want to factor in, and a replacement. You want to factor in a replacement cost going forward. At some point, that machine's tired. I got to replace it. You want to have that budgeted in, that when you come out of this deal, you've made enough money that at least there's some replacement money for equipment and stuff there.
Yeah, but what I say, what's the range the ballpark stuff. I mean, if you look at it and say it's got $3 a yard, that's not enough. It's got $30 a yard, that should be plenty.
Well, my cutoff grade, like I say, once you start looking at numbers, my cutoff grade has always been somewhere between 8 and 10, depending on depth, $8 to $10 a yard. Because in order to scoop that out of the ground, take it over to the plant or push it through the plant and wash it, and then deal with it after, the rock and gravel after the fact, you easily have $6 a yard in it. And then, of course, I want to make something, and I've got diesel fuel and other costs, maintenance costs, oil changes on equipment and things like that. So you automatically got a minimum, even on a small operation like Ted had there, you've got a minimum cost. And day to day, it's actually a fairly fixed cost. Once you're operating, how much gasoline goes in the pump, and how much every day. Your costs actually somewhat become fixed. So, short of a big repair that you blew an engine or something, you've got a fixed set. And when you start looking at that, you can do so many yards a day, and you work the numbers out. So you end up with a cutoff grade. So that's why you test. Because if you can take out ground that you don't need to dig or don't need to touch, you're going to save money. You're not going to lose money, at least on that ground.
So basically, kind of a rough thing is, if it's less than $5 a yard, you walk away pretty much.
Right. You either strip it to better ground. If there's better ground deeper or better ground somewhere else, you just leave that. You need to figure out in your mind pattern what's economic. And where's the cutoff grade? At what point over here toward the bank do I hit a cutoff grade that I have to stop? And then you flag that or paint it out or whatever, so that when your guy on your excavator or yourself, that I'm only going to dig to there. And maybe I'll dig another test hole just to verify that that's true while I'm there. But you don't want to get over into ground for a couple days that you're not getting any gold out of.
Okay.
Or not enough.
Yeah.
$7 doesn't pay for an $8 expense.
And then again, as a rough rule of thumb, then over $10 a yard is potentially profitable.
Definitely. Yeah. Yes, definitely. I mean,
between there, you got to sharpen your pencil.
Even at, if you had just a mini excavator and a small trommel and some pumps, you could $10 a yard, you actually might almost make some money. Depending on what you hit. If you can hit like that ancient channel we were talking about, or some good ground that all of a sudden you pick up a little better than what you actually had tested it at. You tested it at $10 a yard, and all of a sudden you fall into some little pockets where your whole number across the board as an average, maybe it just jumped up to 18. So all of that ground you ran just averaged 18. So you got to use averaging in it also. But you definitely have to find those limits. And my limit is, man, if I don't see $8 a yard material, I don't even want to look at it. I'd like to see $10 a yard and better. And with today's dollars, that's actually could be some fairly lean ground yet when you got $1,700 gold.
Oh yeah. And that I was wondering too, because one of the problems in hard rock vein mining is the grade varies dramatically.
You do here too.
And unpredictably in many ways. When you're on surface digging test holes, it's a little easier than in a vein where you've only got one surface you can see and it's heading that way.
Right.
So how do you kind of guesstimate for the fluctuation? Say, my thought is, if I can make money on the low grade stuff, if I can pay the bills, then anything better than that is gravy.
Right.
So I would theoretically want to be able to mine and pay the bills at the lowest continuous grade I can see.
Definitely. And that we try to use as the most conservative numbers you can, because if it'll work out, if you can mine it on paper, there's a good chance that you're going to get lucky in there and hit some pockets or some channels that give you some extra money. So it really comes down to mining it getting the maps, figuring out what you think, because placer is totally unpredictable also. It's not going to, just because you're in $100 a yard material right now doesn't mean you will be tomorrow morning. It can vary that fast, 10 more feet, and it's like, uh-oh, what happened?
Yep.
But you won't know that till you've already hauled it and put it through the wash plant and then go, well, there's no gold. What happened? So now we just ran, maybe 300 yards of material and we didn't even find any gold.
Do you have like a beginning section of your sluice box like you have in a lot of other smaller sluices, where it's kind of an indicator area?
Most of the time, in almost any sluice box, the first 18 inches or so of the sluice box is fairly predictive of what the environment you're in. I mean, if you run all day or run for 4 hours and you go down and lift I run mud flaps in mine to drop the water. You lift a mud flap and you see gold in the first or second or third riffle, good. You're catching it and there's gold there. If you run all day long and you open everything up and you start looking at everything and there's no gold anywhere, you get a little nervous. And sometimes it's the fine gold. It's down in the miner's moss and you can't see it till you clean it up. But it's disheartening because you're going, geez, we just ran all day and we went through a lot of diesel fuel and, a lot of things. And I'm not seeing any gold.
Yeah, that was what I was learning. I remember when I was dredging, when we were taking a break or whatever, we just idle it down and then we just look at that first part, what they call the indicator mat, and see if you could see anything.
Yeah,
if you're worried, you're like, we're
okay. There's gold.
We got gold here,
right? Because in prospecting underwater like that with a dredge, that's even harder, really, because short of the fact you're getting a sample right away, but you could spend a lot of time trying different spots in the creek, trying to figure out where is there some gold, and then of course going deeper is probably going to get you more, or into a hole, a pocket or something. But placer mining, it's a lot of similarity. We're just doing it from an excavator, sitting up on top of the ground.
Yeah, it clearly, changes a lot as you move around. And this is something that I don't think people who haven't done it on a larger scale really understand just how variable all this stuff is.
It's very variable. There's nothing consistent. I mean, you can get on a area that's consistent. If you're watching Gold Rush, some of that ground up there, the drainages actually are fairly consistent because that gold is actually, some of that gold came from 100, 200 miles farther up in. It didn't just come from the mountain and here it is right here. Some of that gold, some of those drainages run for a long, long ways. So you ended up with a consistent pattern of spread, over eons of laying that gold down in those gravel layers and in that gravel. So, but the thing is it's an economy of scale when you look at what they're doing, because in order to get a lot of what they were running a few years ago, I mean, right now we got higher gold prices, but a few years ago, those guys are running $10 a yard material. Well, that's why they're running 3,000 yards a day of it, because to get economic, you have to size everything to the point that it becomes economic, that it'll pay for the loaders and excavation and all the stripping and ripping permafrost. And so everything has an economy of scale. So you either have to find a deposit that has good values so that if you want to just sit there with the high banker and do it all day, you can make money, or you've got good ground, because if you were to run $10 a yard ground with a high banker, you'd be worn out first before you had your first ounce of gold. It's just too much. So there's a scale that, in order for it to be economic, you have to run a certain amount of yardage that is going to pay for the expenses of what you're doing if you really want to make money.
Hey, First, how's it going? Now, Jeff Bybee said he read the IRS auditor's manual. It said to look for operations that always lose money, because if you don't make any money, then they call them a hobby and nothing is deductible. And everything that is found is taxable. But yeah, get an accountant when you got stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. If you're going to go into it in that scale, you definitely want an accountant. Gold mining actually has a lot of everything's a write-off just about, but you do have to have gold. You have to have gold coming in order to, pay for that updates and equipment and new pump or whatever you need as you're going along.
Yeah.
So it helps to start with some kind of a nest egg of money as far as, or the backing to literally put equipment on the ground, mobilize equipment, dig your infrastructure, 1 or 2 ponds, a settling pond, whatever you need, pull the ore that you take out of that area, you stack it for running through the plant later, build your infrastructure, figure out your pumping and how you're going to handle everything, and then have enough money that you can mine for 2 months before you have to literally go sell gold or start to work on that side of the cash side of it, the flow. So you really want to have that cushion of being able to mine for a while till you've got, 10 ounces of gold or 100 ounces of gold or, 1,000 ounces of gold.
Yeah, notice, Jeff, I saw what you were responding to there, but it's generally a good idea. You have to make some kind of money in the long run that you show, but you can also stockpile recovered gold that you don't need to sell for profit without paying taxes on it, because it has an indeterminate value. So if
you can stack all the gold you want up and there's no taxes on it till you sell it.
Exactly. And so
you can have a grain bin, just like a wheat farmer, you can have that grain bin full out there, and as long as you never sell it, it literally does not exist.
Yeah, taxably.
Right.
And that's why you kind of, again, you talk to your accountant and everything, but you can balance your gold sales to meet your income
expenses,
and therefore, get you right in the sweet spot where you're making a profit, but not so much that you pay much in taxes.
No. If you don't need it, why would you spend it or why cash it in? I mean, if you need it to pay the fuel bill or the repair bill or a new piece of equipment, you sell it or trade it, whatever. But, in my operation over the last few years, I actually got into some pretty lean ground. And as much as I know, or I think I know, I got into some lean ground and I was just working it knowing that I was going to find another pocket. And I finally threw in the towel. But it ended up costing a fair amount of money in expenses because the amount of gold we were recovering every day, I'm not sure it even paid the diesel fuel bill. And we did this for, about a month or a month and a half. So the expenses, just like any business, you've got, help you're taking care of, and you got food bills and all the other bills come along with.
Okay. Jimmy has another question here. Let me get just a sheet of paper. Okay. Jimmy's question is, explain more on the other type of flotation, the column flotation as opposed to conventional flotation. Let's see how I can do this here, see whether I'm good. Now, in conventional flotation, you have a tank. It has an overflow here. You put your ore in, like at this end, and then you'll have some paddles here.
Restoration.
And then you'll have a drain down here. So you inject air here, you put your slurry in there, and this agitates everything real well, and the bubbles come up to the top and they float up here, and then they'll run out, and this is your froth that you collect, and this is your tailings. It'll typically go to another flotation cell, and like that. Now with column flotation, you have a tall column, and you put your slurry in, and you bubble air this way. And as the air bubbles up, it collects the desirable minerals. And then the froth comes up the top and goes over here. And then the depleted slurry comes out the other side like that. And the physics that happens here is somewhat different than the physics that happens there. And in certain situations, it's superior. Now, one thing you can do here is you can have a sprinkler that's sprinkling clean water, here. And so it's actually, say this is the froth zone up here. Okay, this is all froth. Then this is rinsing against the froth. The bubbles are coming up here, and it can clean it better than this can here. So there's a variety of reasons why you would use one versus the other, but it's all very and how it works. I am not very familiar with flotation, except the very basics. And the people over there at Montana Tech are, because the whole field of flotation has to do a lot with collectors and frothers and suppressants and this and that and the other. Whereas by changing the chemistry of the liquid by various ways, you can really make it selective and do a lot of things. You can really make, jump up and roll over and play dead and whatever you want to do. It's not a real simple process in that you can do a lot with it. As such, you have to know a fair amount. If you have a very simple ore, then you could probably do a very simple flotation. It wouldn't be very difficult. But if you got some more complications, life can get complicated. This ore looks like it's going to be complicated. So we will see where it all leads. Luckily, we happen to be close enough to some really smart people with some really good equipment that can try these things out and help us out on this. I'm very happy that, geographically we have that resource within reach. For all you other people, consider how, bureaus of mines or universities and such.
Yeah, Colorado University's got a lot.
Might be
McKay
helpful to
School
you.
of Mines.
Every state university has two different parts to it. They're
Geology.
mandated by law. One is the agricultural part where you find your agricultural extensions and such for gardeners. The other one is the technical side. And out here in the West, most of the universities that have a tech side, the tech side will have some mining stuff.
Yeah, I say there's a lot of, you take like Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Montana. They've all got, schools
Even
that
California,
deal with mining as a specialty.
University of Minnesota.
Well, that was the mandate of the state universities. They were supposed to teach agriculture and mining and
Yeah. I'd say the whole, are you getting coal or are you getting metallic minerals? What kind and what matrix? Blah, blah, blah.
You got a lot. Salt, gypsum. There's a lot of things that are mined.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd kind of like to just bring up, just to show people how complicated this can be, was asking for some information on cyanide leaching. And what they have over there is they have these, what they call artisanal miners. These are small, mom and pop scale operations, although over there mainly pop and pop. And, sons and possible was, I mentioned earlier tonight about a gentleman in South for some information on cyanide leaching. And what they have over there is and do a very simple kind of on average.
Right.
So they're losing a lot of gold. And this gentleman was wanting to take the tailings from these various small little mines, kind of combine them into a stream to feed a cyanide mill, which is when he described the feed, he described it as 1% gold, not one. And I can see it's buffering on me here too. Can everyone hear okay? The cyanide mill, which is much more capital intensive than most of these people could even accomplish.
You got infrastructure.
He described it as 1% gold, not 1 ounce per ton gold. We're talking slow. If someone can tell me we're talking, if it isn't, then I'm pretty much stream issues for the last properly.
Video did kind of hesitate there.
Yeah, I mean, I
see
could
it.
see how
Yeah,
it's doing that there.
it's dragging.
Yeah, it's, and so now you get into a situation where perhaps cyanide is not your best way to go, because cyanide is really cheap, but it's slow. Would
Probably
they?
asking about Africa or down there.
I'm not sure who
South
you're asking
America.
about, Lincoln. In Africa, they some crude looking ball mills, but they work.
Yeah.
You know, and I say I'm not having some buffering problems again. Let's see what happens here. So I still haven't gotten an answer to my question. So that leads me to believe that maybe nobody could hear my question.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, Zioxio. He says he can't even. They run trommels.
Asking about Africa or down there.
I'm not sure who
South
you're asking
America.
about, Lincoln. In Africa, they have to crush it very, very fine anyway. And they're basically just using ball mills.